These are the ones. Speaker. Hey, welcome back. So now we will be going through continuing from chapter 23 of Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Okay, so from this we have left off previously from chapter 23 where Passepartout becomes outrageously long. Okay, the next morning, poor jaded, famished Passepartout said to himself that he must get something to eat at all hazards. And the sooner he did so French and English songs and resolved to try them upon the Japanese, who must be the lovers of music, since they were forever pounding on their cymbals, tam-tams, and tambourines, and could not but appreciate European talent. Okay, so all of these are instruments, musical instruments. Instruments. Okay, and following we have it was perhaps rather early in the morning to get up a concert, and the audience, prematurely aroused from their slumbers, might not possibly pay the entertainer which with coin bearing the Mikado features. Passepartout therefore decided to wait several hours, and as he was sauntering along, it occurred to him that he would seem rather too well dressed for a wandering artist. The idea struck him to change his garments for clothes, more in harmony with his project, by which he might also get a little money to satisfy the immediate cravings of hunger. The resolution taken, it remained to carry it out. It was only after a long search that Passepartout discovered a native dealer in old clothes, to whom he applied for an exchange. The man liked the European costume, and ere long Passepartout issued from his shop accoutred in an old Japanese coat and a sort of one-sided turban, faded in long use. A few small pieces of silver, moreover, jingled in his pocket. Good, thought he. I would imagine I am at a carnival. His first care, after being thus Japanesed, was to enter a tea house of modest appearance, and, upon half a bird and a little rice, to breakfast like a man for whom dinner was as yet a problem to be solved. Now, thought he, when he had eaten heartily, I mustn't lose my head. I can't sell this costume again for one still more Japanese. I must consider how to leave this country of the sun, of which I shall not retain the most delightful of memories, as quickly as possible. It occurred to him to visit the steamers which were about to leave for America. He would offer himself as a cook or servant in payment of his passage and meals. Once at San Francisco, he would find some means of going on. The difficulty was how to traverse the 4,700 miles of the Pacific which lay between Japan and the New World. Passepartout was not the man to let an idea go begging, and directed his steps towards the docks. But as he approached them, his project, which at first had seemed so simple, began to grow more and more formidable to his mind. What need would they have of a cook or servant on an American steamer? And what confidence would they put in him, dressed as he was? What references could he give? As he was reflecting in this wise, his eyes fell upon an immense placard which a sort of clown was carrying through the streets. This placard, which was in English, read as follows: He, acrobatic Japanese troupe, Honorable William Butler, perpetual last representations prior to their departure to the United States of the Long Noses. Long Noses, under the direct patronage of the god Tiro, a great attraction. He, the United States, said Passepartout. That's just what I want. He followed the clown and as soon found himself once more in the Japanese quarter. A quarter of an hour later, he stopped before a large cabin, adorned with several clusters of streamers, the exterior walls of which were designed to represent, in violent colors and without perspective, a company of jugglers. This was the Honorable William Butler establishment. That gentleman was a sort of Barnum, the director of a troupe of Mont Blancs, jugglers, clowns, acrobats, equilibrists, and gymnasts, who, according to the placard, was giving his last performances before leaving the Empire of the Sun for the States of the Union. Passepartout entered and asked for Mr. Butler, who straightway appeared in person. "What would you like?" said he to Passepartout, who he at first took for a native. Native means a local. "Would you like a servant, sir?" asked Passepartout. "A servant," cried Mr. Butler, caressing the thick grey beard which hung from his chin. "I already have two who are obedient and faithful, and have never left me, and serve me for the nourishment, and here they are," added he, holding out his two robust arms, furrowed with veins as large as the strings of Basile. "So I can be of no use to you?" "None." "The devil! I should so like to cross the Pacific with you." "Ah," said the Honorable Mr. Butler, "you are no more a Japanese than I am a monkey. Who are you?" "Wait," a little vexed that his nationality should cause this question. "We Frenchmen know how to make grimaces. It is true, but not any better than the Americans do." "True. Well, if I can't take you as a servant, I can as a clown. You see, my friend, in France they exhibit foreign clowns, and in foreign parts French clowns." "You are pretty strong, especially after a good meal. And you can sing?" "Yes," returned Passepartout, who had formerly been wont to sing in the streets. "But can you sing standing on your head, with a top spinning on your left foot, and sabre balanced on your right?" I think so," replied Passepartout, recalling the resounded at the door. Passepartout, though he had not been able to study or rehearse a part, was designated to lend the aid of his sturdy shoulders in the great exhibition of the human pyramid, executed by the long noses of the god Tingo. This great attraction was to close the performance. Here's the ending of the performance. Before 3 o'clock, and the large shed was invaded by the spectators, comprising Europeans and natives, Chinese and Japanese, men, women, and children, who precipitated themselves upon the narrow benches and into the boxes opposite the stage. The musicians took up a position inside and were vigorously performing on their gongs, tam-tams, flutes, bones, tambourines, and immense drums. The performance was much like all acrobatic displays, but it must be confessed that the Japanese are the first equilibrists in the world. One, with a fan and some bits of paper, performed the graceful trick of butterflies and the flowers. Another traced in the air, with the odorous smoke of his pipe, a series of blue words, which composed a compliment to the audience, while a third juggled with some lighted candles, which he extinguished successively as they passed his lips, and relit again without interrupting for an instant his juggling. Another reproduced the most singular combinations with a spinning top. In his hands the revolving tops seemed to be animated with a life of their own in their interminable whirring. They ran over pipe stems, the edges of sabres, wires, and even hairs stretched across the stage. They turned around on the edges of large glasses, crossed bamboo ladders, dispersed into all the corners, and produced strange musical effects by the combinations of their various pitches. The jugglers tossed them in the air, threw them like shuttlecocks with wooden battledores, and they kept on spinning. They put them into their pockets and took them out, still whirling as before. It is useless to describe the astonishing performances of the acrobats and gymnasts. The turning on ladders, poles, bowls, barrels, and etc. was executed with wonderful precision. The principal attraction was the exhibition of the Long Noses, a show to which Europe is yet a stranger. The Long Noses form a peculiar company. Under the, dis- Under the direct patronage of the god Tingo, attired after the fashion of the Middle Ages, they they bore upon their shoulders a splendid pair of wings. But what especially distinguished them was the long noses, which were fastened to their faces, and the uses which made of them. These noses were made of bamboo and were 5, 6, and even 10 feet long, some straight, others curved, some ribboned, and some having imitation warts upon them. It was upon these appendages, fixed tightly on their real noses, that they performed their gymnastic exercises. A dozen of these secretaries of Tingo lay flat upon their backs, while others, dressed to represent lightning rods, came and frolicked on their noses, jumping from one to another, and performing the most skilful leapings and somersaults. As a last scene, a human pyramid had been announced, in which 50 long noses were to represent the car of Juggernaut. But instead of forming a pyramid by mounting each other's shoulders, the artists will group themselves on top of noses. It happens that the performer, who had hitherto formed the base of the car, had quitted the troupe, and as to fill this part, only strength and adroitness were necessary. Passepartout had been chosen to take his place. The poor fellow really felt sad when melancholy reminiscence of his youth. He donned his costume, adorned with varied-colored rings, and fastened to his natural feature of a false nose 6 feet long. But he cheered up when he thought that his nose was winning him something to eat. He went upon the stage and took his place beside the rest who were to compose the base of the car of Juggernaut. They all stretched themselves on the floor, their noses pointing to the ceiling. A second group of artists disposed themselves on these long appendages, then a third above these, then a fourth, until a human monument reaching to the very cornices of the theatre soon arose on the top of the noses. This elicited loud applause in the midst of when the orchestra was just striking up a deafening air. When the pyramid tottered, the balance was lost. One of the lower noises vanished from the pyramid, and the human monument was shattered. He demanded the damages for the breakage of the pyramid, and Phileas Fogg appeased him by giving him a handful of banknotes. At 6:30, the very hour of departure, Mr. Fogg and Alda, followed by Passepartout, who in his hurry had retained his wings and nose 6 feet long, stepped upon the American steamer. Okay, chapter 24, during which Mr. Fogg and party crossed the Pacific Ocean. What happened when the pilot boat came in sight of had directed his course towards the little craft? Phileas Fogg, after paying the stipulated price of his passage to John Busby, and rewarding the worthy of the additional sum of £550, ascended with Alda and Fix. They reached their destination on the morning of the 14th of November. Phileas Fogg lost no time in going on board the Carnatic, where he learned, to Alda's great delight, and perhaps to his own, though he betrayed no emotion, that Passepartout, a Frenchman, had really arrived on her day the before. The San Francisco steamer was announced to leave that very evening, and it became necessary to find Passepartout, if very possible without delay. Mr. Fogg applied in vain to the French and English consuls, and after wandering through the streets a long time began to despair of finding his missing servant. Chance, or perhaps a kind of presentiment, at last led him into the Honourable Mr. Baticolas's theatre. He certainly would not have recognized Passepartout in the eccentric mountebank's costume, but the latter, lying in his bank, perceived his master in the gallery. He could not help starting, which so changed the position of his nose as to bring the pyramid pell-mell upon the stage. All these Passepartout learned from Auda, who recounted to him that had taken place on the voyage from Hong Kong to Shanghai in the Tankadere, in company with one Mr. Fix. Passepartout did not change countenance on hearing this name. He thought that time that had not yet arrived to divulge his master what had taken place between the detective and himself, and in the account he gave of his absence, he simply excused himself for having been overtaken by drunkenness in smoking opium at the tavern in Hong Kong. Mr. Fogg heard this narrative coldly, without a word, and then furnished his men with funds necessary to obtain clothing more in harmony with his position. Within an hour the Frenchman had cut off his nose and parted with his wings, and retained nothing but him, which recalled the secretary of the god Tingo. The steamer which was about to depart from Yokohama to San Francisco belonged to the Pacific Mail Steamship Company, and was named the General Grant. She was a large paddle wheel steamer of 2,500 tons, well equipped and very fast. The massive walking beam rose and fell beyond deck, and at one piston rod worked up and down, then the other was a connecting rod which, in changing the rectilinear motion to a circular one, was directly connected with the shaft of the paddles. The General Grant was rigged with 3 masts, giving a large capacity for sails and thus materially aiding the steam power. By making 12 miles an hour, she would cross the ocean in 21 days. Phileas Fogg was therefore justified in hoping that he would reach San Francisco by the 2nd of December, New York by the 11th, and London on the 20th, thus gaining several hours on the fatal date of the 21st of December. This is the date that he placed the bet on. There was a full complement of passengers on board, among them English, many Americans, a large number of coolies on their way to California, and several East Indian officers who were spending their vacation in making the tour of the world. Nothing of the moment happened on the voyage. The steamer, sustained on its large paddles, rowed but little, and the Pacific almost justified its name. Mr. Fogg was as calm and taciturn as ever. His young companion felt herself more and more attached to him by other ties than gratitude. His silent but generous nature impressed her more than she thought, and it was almost unconsciously that she yielded to emotions which did not seem to have the least effect upon her protector. Auda took the keenest interest in his plans and became impatient at any incident which she seemed likely to retard his journey. She often chatted with Passepartout, who did not fail to perceive the state of the lady's heart, and being the most faithful of domestics, he never exhausted his eulogies of Phileas Fogg's honesty, generosity, and devotion. He took pains to calm Auda's doubts and the successful termination of the journey, telling her that the most difficult part of it had passed, and now that they were beyond the fantastic countries of Japan and China, and were fairly on their way to civilized places again. A railway train from San Francisco to New York, and transatlantic steamer from New York to Liverpool would doubtlessly bring them to the end of this impossible journey round the world within the period agreed upon. On the 9th day after leaving Yokohama, Phileas Fogg had traversed exactly one half of the terrestrial globe. The General Grant passed on the 23rd of November, the 180th meridian, and was very anticipated of London. Mr. Fogg had, it is true, exhausted 52 of the 80 days in which he was to complete the tour, and there were only 28 left. But though he was only halfway by the difference of the meridians, he had really gone over 2/3 of the whole journey, for he had been obliged to make long circuits from London to Eden, from Eden to Bombay, Calcutta to Singapore, and from Singapore to Yokohama. Could he have followed without deviation to the 50th parallel, which is that of London, the whole distance would only have been about 12,000 miles, whereas he would be forced by the irregular methods of locomotion to traverse 26,000 of which he had, on the 23rd of November, accomplished 17,500. And now the course was a straight one, and Fix was no longer there to put obstacles in their way. It happened also on the 23rd of November that Passepartout made a joyful discovery. It will be remembered that the obstinate fellow had insisted on keeping his famous family watch at London time, and on regarding that of countries he had passed through and quite false and unreliable. Now on this day, though he had not changed the hands, he found that his watch exactly agreed with the ship's chronometers. His triumph was hilarious. He would have liked to know what Fix would have said if he were abroad. The rogue told me a lot of stories, repeated Passepartout, about the meridians, the sun, and the moon. Moon indeed. Moonshine more likely. If one listened to that sort of people, a difference between London time and that of the 180th meridian. But if Fix had been able to explain these purely physical effects, Passepartout would not have admitted, even if he had comprehended it. Moreover, if the detective had been on board at that moment, Passepartout would have joined issue with him on quite different subjects, and in an extremely different manner. Where was Fix at that moment? He was actually on board the General Grant. On Yokohama, the detective, leaving Mr. Fogg, whom he expected to meet again during the day, had repaired at once to the English consulate, where he at last found a warrant of arrest. It had followed him from Bombay and had come by the Carnatic, on which steamer he himself was supposed to be. Fix's disappointment may be imagined when he reflected that the warrant was now useless. Mr. Fogg had left the English ground, and it was now necessary to procure his extradition. Well, thought Mr. Fix, after a moment of anger, my warrant is not good here, but it will be in England. The rogue evidently intends to return his own country, thinking he has thrown the police off his track. Good, I will follow him across the Atlantic. As for the money, heaven grant there may be some left, but the fellow had already spent in travelling rewards, trials, bail, elephants, and all sorts of charges more than £5,000. Yet after all, the bank is rich. His course decided on, he went on aboard General Grant and was there when Mr. Fogg and Aldous arrived. To his utter amazement, he recognized Passepartout. Despite his theatrical disguise, he quickly concealed himself in his cabin to avoid an awkward explanation and hoped, thanks to the number of passengers, to remain unperceived by Mr. Fogg's servants. On that very day, however, he met Passepartout face to face on the forward deck. The latter, without a word, made a rush for him, grasped him by the throat, and, much to the amusement of a group of Americans, who immediately began to bet on him, administered to the detective a perfect volley of blows, which proved the great superiority of French over English pugilistic skills. When Passepartout had finished, he found himself relieved and comforted. Fix got up in a somewhat rumpled condition, and looking at his adversary coldly said, "Have you done? For this time, yes. Then let me have a word with you. But I, in your master's interest." Passepartout seemed to be vanquished by Fix's coolness, for he quietly followed him, and they sat down aside from the rest of the passengers. "You have given me a thrashing," said Fix. "Good. I expected it. Now listen to me. Up to this time, I have been Mr. Fogg's adversary, and I am now in this game." "Aha!" cried Passepartout. "You are convinced he is an honest man?" "No," replied Fix coldly. "I think him a rascal." "Don't budge and let me speak. As long as Mr. Fogg was on the English ground, it was for my interest to detain him there till my warrant of arrest arrived. I did everything I could to keep him back. I sent the Bombay police after him. I got you intoxicated at Hong Kong. I separated you from him, and I made you miss the Yokohama steamer." Passepartout listened with closed fists. Now, resumed Fix. Mr. Fogg seems to be going back to England. Well, I will follow him there, but hereafter I will do as much to keep obstacles out of his way as I have done up to this time to put them in his path. I've changed my game, you see, and simply because it was for my interest to change it. Your interest is the same as mine, for it is the only in England that you are certain whether you are in the service of a criminal or an honest man. Passepartout listened very attentively to Fix and was convinced that he spoke with entire good faith. Are we friends? Asked the detective. Friends? No, replied Passepartout, but allies perhaps. At the least sign of treason, will, however, I twist your neck for you. Agreed, said the detective quietly. 11 days later, on the 3rd of December, the General Grant entered the Bay of the Golden Gate and reached San Francisco. Mr. Fogg had neither gained nor lost a single day. Okay, chapter 25. Okay, it was 7 in the morning when Mr. Fogg, Alda, and Passepartout set foot upon the American continent, if this name can be given to the floating quay upon which they disembarked. These quays, rising and falling with the tide, thus facilitate the loading and unloading of the vessels. Alongside them were clippers of all sizes, steamers of all nationalities, and steamboats, with several docks rising one above the other, which ply on the Sacramento and its tributaries. There were also heaped up the products of a commerce which extends to Mexico, Chile, Peru, Brazil, Europe, Asia, and all the Pacific islands. Passepartout, in his joy on reaching at last the American continent, thought he would manifest it by executing a perilous vault in fine style. But tumbling upon some worm-eaten planks, he fell through them. Put up the countenance by the manner in which he thus set foot upon the new world. He uttered a loud cry which so frightened the innumerable cormorants and pelicans that were always perched upon these movable quays, that they flew noisily away. Mr. Fogg, on reaching shore, proceeded to find out what hour the first train left for New York, and learned that this was 6 o'clock p.m. He had, therefore, an entire day to spend in the Californian capital. Taking a carriage at the charge of $3, he and Alda entered it, while Passepartout mounted the box beside the driver, and they set out for the International Hotel. From his exalted position, Passepartout observed with much curiosity the wide streets, the low, evenly ranged houses, the Anglo-Saxon Gothic churches, the great docks, and the palatial wooden and brick warehouses, the numerous conveyances, omnibuses, horse cars, and upon the sidewalks, not only Americans and Europeans, but Chinese and Indians. Passepartout was surprised at all he saw. San Francisco was no longer the legendary city of 1849, a city of banditti, assassins, and the incendiaries, who had flocked hither in crowds in pursuit of plunder, a paradise of outlaws, where they gambled with gold dust, a revolver in one hand and a bow-tie knife in the other. It was now a great commercial emporium. The lofty tower of its city hall overlooked the whole panorama of the streets and avenues, which cut each other at right angles, and in the midst of which appeared pleasant, verdant squares, while beyond appeared the Chinese Quarter, seemingly imported from the Celestial Empire in the toy box. Sombreros and red shirts and plumed Indians were rarely to be seen, but there were silk hats and black coats everywhere worn by a multitude of nervously active, gentlemanly-looking men. Some of the streets, especially Montgomery Street, which is to San Francisco what Regent Street is to London, the Boulevard which des Italiens to Paris, and Broadway to New York, were lined with splendid and spacious stores, which exposed in their windows and the products of the entire world. When Passepartout reached the International Hotel, it did not seem to him as if he had left England at all. The ground floor of the hotel was occupied by a large bar, a sort of restaurant freely open to all passers-by, who might partake of dried beef, oyster soup, biscuits, and cheese. Without taking out their purses, payment was made only at the ale, porter or sherry which was drunk. These seemed very American to Passepartout. The hotel refreshment rooms were comfortable, and Mr. Fogg and Alda, installing themselves at the table, were abundantly served on diminutive plates and negers of the darkest hue. After breakfast, Mr. Fogg, accompanied by Alda, started for the English consulate to have his passport visaed. As he was going out, he met Passepartout, who asked him if it would not be well, before taking the train, to purchase some dozens of Enfield rifles and Colt's revolvers. He had been listening to the stories of attacks upon the trains by the Sioux and Pawnees. Mr. Fogg thought it would be useless precaution, but told him to do as he thought best, and went on to the consulate. He had not proceeded 200 steps, however, when by the greatest chance in the world, he met Fix. The detective seemed wholly taken by surprise. What, had Mr. Fogg and himself crossed the Pacific together, and not met on the steamer? At least Fix felt honoured to behold once more the gentleman whom he owed so much, and as his business recalled him to Europe, he should be delighted to continue the journey in such a pleasant company. Mr. Fogg replied that the honour would be his, and the detective, who was determined not to lose sight of him, begged permission to accompany him on their walk to San Francisco, request which Mr. Fogg readily granted. They soon found themselves in Montgomery Street, where the great crowd was collected. They soon found themselves in the Montgomery Street, where the great crowd was collected. The sidewalks, street horse-car wheels, the shop doors, the windows of the houses, and even the roofs were full of people. Men were going about carrying large posters, and flags and steamers were floating in the wind, while loud cries were heard on every hand. Hooray for Camerfield! Hooray for Mandyboy! It was a political meeting, at least so Fix conjectured, who said to Mr. Fogg, "Perhaps we had better not mingle with the crowd. There may be danger in it." "Yes," returned Mr. Fogg, "and blows. Even if they are political, are the occasion of this excited assemblage." Phileas Fogg could not imagine. Was it to nominate some high official, governor of a member of Congress? It was not improbable, so agitated was the multitude before them. Just at this moment there was an unusual stir in the human mass. All the hands were raised in the air, some tightly closed, seemed to disappear suddenly in the midst of the cries, an energetic way, no doubt, of casting a vote. The crowd swayed back, the banners and flags wavered, disappeared in Mr. Fogg's arm, observed the tumultuous steam with surprise. while Fix asked the man near him what the cause of it all was. Before the man could reply, a fresh agitation arose. Raised and excited shouts were heard. The stars of the banner began to be used as offensive weapons, and fists flew about in every direction. Thumbs were exchanged from the tops of carriages and omnibuses which had been blocked in the crowd. Boots and shoes went whirling through the air, and Mr. Fogg thought he even heard the crack of revolvers mingling in the din. The rout approached the stairway and flowed over the lower step. One of the parties had evidently been repulsed, but the mere lookers-on could not tell whether Mannyboy or Cunnifield had gained the upper hand. It would be prudent for us to retire, said Fix, who was anxious that Mr. Fogg should not receive any injury, at least until they got back to London. If there is any question about England in all this, and we were recognised, I fear it will go hard with us. An English subject, began Mr. Fogg. He did not finish his sentence, for a terrible hubbub now arose on the terrace behind the flights of steps where they stood, and there were frantic shouts of hooray from Mandyboy. Hip, hip, hooray! It was a band of voters coming to the rescue of their allies, and taking the Camfield forces in flank. Mr. Fogg, Alda, and Fix found themselves between two fires. It was too late to escape. The torrent of men armed with loaded canes and sticks was irresistible. Phileas Fogg and Fix were roughly hustled in their attempts to protect their fair companion. The former, as cool as ever, tried to defend himself with the weapons which nature had placed at the end of every Englishman's arm, but in vain. A big brawny fellow with a red beard, flushed face, and broad shoulders, who seemed to be the chief of the band, raised his clenched fists to strike Mr. Fogg, whom he would have given a crushing blow had not Fix rushed in and received it in his stead. An enormous bruise immediately made its appearance under the detective's steel hat, which was completely smashed in. Yankee! Exclaimed Mr. Fogg, darting a contemptuous look at the ruffian. Englishman, returned the other, we will meet again. When you please. What is your name? Phileas Fogg. And yours? Colonel Stamp Protector. The human tide now swept by, after overturning Fix, who speedily got upon his feet again, though with tattered clothes. Happily, he was not seriously hurt. His travelling overcoat was divided into two unequal parts, and his trousers resembled those of certain Indians, which fit less compactly than they are easy to put on. Alda had escaped unharmed, and Fix alone bore marks of the fray in his black and blue bruise. Thanks, said Mr. Fogg to the detective, as soon as they were out of the crowd. No thanks are necessary, replied Fix, but let us go. Where? To a tailor's. Such a visit was indeed opportune. The clothing of both Mr. Fogg and Fix was in rags, as if they had themselves and actively engaged in a contest between Cunnifield and Mandyboy. An hour after, they were once more suitably attired, and with Alda returned to the International Hotel, Passepartout was waiting for his master, armed with half a dozen six-barreled revolvers, where he perceived Fix. He knit his brows, but Alda, having, in a few words, told him of their adventure, his countenance resumed its placid expression. Fix evidently was no longer an enemy, but an ally. He was faithfully keeping his word. Dinner over, the coach, which was to convey the passengers and the luggage to the station, drew up to the door, and he was getting in. Mr. Fogg said to Fix, "You have not seen this Colonel Proctor again?" "No." "I will come back to America to find him," said Phileas Fogg calmly. It would not be right for an Englishman to permit himself to be treated in that way. Without retaliating, the detective smiled, but did not reply. It was clear to Mr. Fogg that one of these Englishmen, who, while they do not tolerate dwelling at home, fight abroad when when their honor is attacked. At 6:15, the travellers reached the station and found the train ready to depart. As he was about to enter it, Mr. Fogg called the porter and said to him, "My friend," the porter, "but I thought there was a great deal of disturbance in the streets. It was only a meeting assembled for an election." "Election of a general-in-chief, no doubt," asked Mr. Fogg. "No, sir, a justice of peace." Phileas Fogg got into the train, which started off at full speed. Okay, let's move on to the next chapter, chapter 26. Okay, now we are at chapter 26. Do let me know if you have any questions on the vocabulary or anything else. Okay, I'll leave this here for a while. From ocean to the ocean, so say the Americans, and these four words compose the general designation of the Great Trunk Line, which crosses the entire width of the United States. The Pacific Railroad is, however, really divided between two distinct lines: the Central Pacific between San Francisco and Ogden, and the Union Pacific between Ogden and Omaha. Five main lines connected Omaha with New York. New York and San Francisco are thus united by an uninterrupted metal ribbon, which measures no less than 3,786 miles. Okay, the distance. Between Omaha and the Pacific Railway crosses a territory which is still infested by Indians and wild beasts, and a large tract with the Mormons, after they were driven from Illinois in 1845, began to colonize. The journey from New York to San Francisco consumed, formerly under the most favorable conditions, at least 6 months. It is now accomplished in 7 days. It was in 1862 that, in spite of the southern members of the Congress, who wished a more southerly route, it was decided to lay the road between the 41st and 42nd parallels. President Lincoln himself fixed the end of the line at Omaha, in Nebraska. The work was at once commenced and pursued with true American energy, nor did the rapidity of which it went on injuriously affect its good execution. The road grew. On the prairies, a mile and a half a day. A locomotive running on the rails laid down on the evening before brought the rails to be laid on the morrow, and advanced upon them as fast as they were put in position. The Pacific Railroad is joined by several branches in Iowa, Kansas, Colorado, and Oregon. On leaving Omaha, It passes along the left bank of Platte River as far as the junction of its northern branch, follows its southern branch, crosses the Laramie Territory and the Wasatch of the Mountains, turns the Great Salt Lake, and reaches Salt Lake City. The Mormon capital plunges into the Tooele Valley across the American desert, Cedar and Humboldt Mountains. The Sierra Nevada descends via Sacramento, never exceeding 112 feet to the mile. Such was the road to be traversed in 7 days, which would enable Phileas Fogg at least so he hoped to take the Atlantic steamer at New York on the 11th for Liverpool. The car which he occupied was a sort of long omnibus on 8 wheels, and with no compartments. The interior it was supplied with 2 rows of seats, perpendicular to the direction of the train, on either side of an aisle which conducted to the front and rear platforms. These platforms were found throughout the train, and the passengers were able to pass from one end of the train to another. It was supplied with saloon cars, balcony cars, restaurants, and smoking cars. Theatre cars alone were wanting, and they will have these someday. Book and the news dealers, sellers of edibles, drinkables, and cigars, who seemed to have plenty of customers, were continually circulating in the aisles. The train left Oakland Station at 7 o'clock. It was already night, cold and cheerless, the heavens being overcast with clouds which seemed to threaten snow. The train did not proceed rapidly. Counting the stoppages, it did not turn more than 20 miles an hour, which was a sufficient speed, however, to enable it to reach Omaha within its designated time. There was but little conversation in the car, and soon many of the passengers were overcome with sleep. Passepartout found himself beside the detective, but he did not talk to him. After recent events, their relations with each other had grown somewhat cold. There could no longer be mutual sympathy or intimacy between them. Fix's manner had not changed, but Passepartout was very reserved and ready to strangle his former friend on the slightest provocation. Snow began to fall an hour after they started. A fine snow, however, which happily could not obstruct the train. Nothing, nothing could be seen from the window but a vast white sheet, against which the smoke of the locomotive had a greyish aspect. This is the train. Eyes by thick curtains. The sheets were clean and the pillows soft. It only remained to go to bed and sleep, which everybody did, while the train sped on across the state of California. The country between San Francisco and Sacramento is not very hilly. The Central Pacific, taking Sacramento for its starting point, extends eastward to meet the road from Omaha. The line from San Francisco to Sacramento runs in a northeasterly direction along the American River, 120 miles between these cities were accomplished in 6 hours, and so that it saw nothing else enter the range of the Sierra Nevada. Cisco was reached at 7 in the morning, and an hour later the dormitory was transformed into an ordinary car, and the travelers could observe the picturesque beauties of the mountains regions which they were steaming. The railway track wound in and out among the passes, now approaching the mountain sides, now suspended over precipices, avoiding abrupt angles by bold curves, plunging into narrow defiles which seemed to have no outlet. The locomotive, its great funnel emitting a weird light, with its sharp bell and its cowcatcher extended like a spur, mingled its shrieks and bellowings with the noise of torrents and cascades, and twined its smoke among the branches of the gigantic pines. There were few or no bridges or tunnels in the road. The railway turned around the sides of the mountains. And did not attempt to violate nature by taking the shortest cut from one point to another. The train entered the state of Nevada through the Carson Valley about 9 o'clock, going a ways northeasterly, and at midday reached Reno, where there was a delay of 20 minutes for breakfast. From this point, the road, running along the Humboldt River, passed northward for several miles by its bank. Then it turned eastward and kept by the Silver until it reached the Humboldt Range, nearly the extreme eastern limit of Nevada. Having breakfasted, Mr. Fogg and his companions resumed their places in the car and observed the varied landscape which unfolded itself as they passed along the vast prairies. The mountains lining the horizon and their creeks with their frothy, foaming streams. Sometimes a great herd of buffaloes massing together in the distance seemed like a removable dam. These innumerable multitudes of ruminating beasts often form an insurmountable obstacle to the passage of the trains. Thousands of them have been seen passing over a track for hours together in compact ranks. The locomotives is then forced to stop and wait till the road is once more clear. This happened, indeed, to the train in which Mr. Fogg was travelling. About 12 o'clock, a troop of 10 or 12,000 head of buffalo encumbered the track. The locomotive, slackening its speed, tried to clear the way with its cowcatcher. But the mass of animals was too great. The buffaloes marched along the tranquil gait, uttering now and then the deafening bellowings. There was no use of interrupting them, for having taken a particular direction, nothing can moderate and change their course. It is a torrent of living flesh which no dam could contain. The travellers gazed on this curious spectacle from the platforms, but Phileas Fogg, who had the most reason of all to be in a hurry, remained in his seat and waited philosophically until it should please the buffaloes to get out of the way. Passepartout was furious at the delay they occasioned, and longed to discharge his arsenal of revolvers upon them. "What country?" cried he. "Mere cattle stop the trains, and go by in a procession, just as if they were not impeding travel. Parbleu! I should like to know if Mr. Fogg foresaw this mishap in his programme. And here's an engineer who doesn't dare to run the locomotive into this herd of beasts." The engineer did not try to overcome the obstacle, and he was wise. He would have crushed the first buffaloes, no doubt with the cowcatcher, but the locomotive, however powerful, would soon have been checked. The train would inevitably have been thrown off the track and would have been helpless. The best course was to wait patiently and regain the lost time by greater speed when the obstacle was removed. The procession of the buffaloes lasted 3 full hours, and it was the night before the track was clear. The last ranks of the herd disappeared below the southern horizon. It was 8 o'clock when the train passed through the defiles of the Humboldt Range, and 9:30 when it penetrated Utah, the region of the Great Salt Lake, the singular colony of the Mormons. This personage, who had taken the train at Elko, was tall and dark with black moustache, black stockings, a black silk hat, and a black waistcoat, black trousers, a white cravat, and dog-skin gloves. These are all descriptions. Okay, he might have been taken for a clergyman. He went from one end of the train to the other and affixed to the door of each car a notice written in the manuscript. Passepartout approached and read one of these notices, which stated that Elder William Hitch, Mormon missionary taking advantage of his presence on train number 48, would deliver a lecture on Mormonism in car number 117 from 11 to 12 o'clock, and that he invited all who were desirous of being instructed concerning the mysteries of the religion of the Latter-day Saints to attend. I'll go, said Passepartout to himself. He knew nothing about Mormonism except custom of polygamy, which is to its foundation. The news quickly spread through the train, which contained about 100 passengers, 30 of whom, at most, attracted by the notice, ensconced themselves in the car number 117. Passepartout took one of them to the front seats. Neither Mr. Fogg nor Fix cared to attend. At the pointed hour, Elder William Hitch rose, and in an irritated voice, as if he had already been contradicted, said, I'll tell you that Joe Smith is a martyr, and that his brother Hiram is a martyr, and that the persecutions of the United States government against the prophets would also make a martyr of Brigham Young. Who dare says the contrary? No one ventured to the gainsway missionary, who exited. Who excited tone contrasted curiously with his naturally calm visage. No doubt his anger rose from the hardships to which the Mormons were actually subjected. The government had just succeeded with some difficulty in reducing these independent fanatics to its rule. It had made itself master of Utah and subjected that territory to the laws of the Union after imprisoning Brigham Young in charge of rebellion and polygamy. The disciples of the prophet had since redoubled their efforts and resisted by words at last. The authority of Congress, Elder Hitch is as seen, was trying to make proselytes on the very railways trains. Then, emphasizing his words with his loud voice and frequent gestures, he related the history of the Mormons from biblical times. How that is Israel, a Mormon prophet of the tribe of Joseph, published the annals of the new religion and bequeathed them to his son Mormon. How many centuries later, a translation of this precious book, which was written in Egyptian, was made by Joseph Smith, a junior, a Vermont farmer, who revealed himself as a mystical prophet in 1825, and how, in short, a celestial messenger appeared to him in an illuminated forest and gave him the annals of the Lord. Several of the audience, not being much interested in the missionary narrative, here left the car, but Elder Hitch, continuing his lecture, related how Smith, Jr., with his father, two brothers, and a few disciples, founded the Church of the Latter-day Saints, which adopted not only in America but in England, Norway and Sweden, and Germany, counts many artisans as well as men engaged in literal professions among its members, how a colony was established in Ohio, a temple erected there at the cost of $200,000, and a town built at Kirkland, how Smith became an enterprising banker and returned from a simple mummy showman, a papyrus scroll within Abraham and several famous Egyptians. The elder's story became somewhat wearisome, and his audience grew gradually less, until it was reduced to 20 passengers. But this did not disconcert the enthusiasts, who proceeded with the story of Joseph Smith's bankruptcy in 1827, and how he ruined the creditors, gave him the coat of tar and feathers, his reappearance some years afterwards, more honorable and honored than ever at Independence, the missionary-in-chief of flourishing colony of 3,000 disciples, and his pursuit plans by outraged Gentiles and retirement into the far west. 10 hearers were now left, among them honest Passepartout, who was listening with all his ears. Thus we learned that after long persecutions, Smith reappeared in Illinois and in 1839 founded a community at Nauvoo on the Mississippi, numbering 25,000 souls, of which he became mayor, chief justice, and general-in-chief. That he announced himself in 1843, a candidate of presidency for the United States, and that finally being drawn into the ambuscades of Carthage, he was thrown into prison and assassinated by a band of men disguised in masks. Passepartout was now the only person left in the car, and the elder, looking at him full in the face, reminded him that 2 years after the assassination of Joseph Smith, the inspired prophet Brigham Young, his successor, left Nauvoo for the banks of the Great Salt Lake. There, in the midst of that fertile region, directly on the road of the emigrants who crossed Utah on their way to California, the new colony, thanks to the polygamy practiced by the Mormons, had flourished beyond expectations. And this, added Elder William Hitch, this is why the jealousy of the Congress had been aroused against us. Why has Brigham Young, our chief, have been imprisoned in contempt of all justice? Shall we yield to single auditor? Will you not plant yours there too, under the shadow of your flag? Okay, so over here, let's stop at here for today. Okay, we will continue on with our next live, and thank you all for tuning into our live today. And do remember that we have a live going on later on in the afternoon, so please remember to follow us and keep notified for daily English live lessons. Learn English with us. Okay,